Someone once said the entire global economy is just a giant, trust me, bro. At first, this sounds silly, but it's surprisingly accurate. Think about the board game Monopoly. There's a rule that says if the bank runs out of money, you can just cut strips of paper and make new ones. The game never has to end because of a money shortage. On August 15th, 1971, something similar happened in real life. President Richard Nixon announced that the United States would drop the gold standard,
the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary,
meaning dollars would no longer be backed by physical gold. After that decision, America became like the banker in a global game of Monopoly. According to the rules, America could never truly run out of money again because it could simply create more. This brings us to a puzzling question. When we hear that a billionaire is millions of dollars in debt, why does he not just pay up? And if the government can print more money, why does debt even matter? The answer lies in understanding what debt really is, how it works, and why the entire system depends on one invisible force: trust. What is debt? Debt is money you borrow with a promise to pay it back later, usually with extra money called interest. Think of it this way: if you borrow $10 from your friend and promise to give back $11 next month, that extra $1 is the interest, the cost of borrowing. Debt exists at every level. Personal debt, when individuals borrow money, credit cards, student loans, car loans, mortgages. Business debt, when companies borrow to expand or operate. National debt, when governments borrow to fund programs, infrastructure, or war. At its core, debt is a tool. Like a hammer, it can build something valuable, or cause serious damage if misused. A brief history of debt. Debt isn't new. In fact, it's ancient. Historians have found records of borrowing in Mesopotamia over 5,000 years ago. Back then, farmers borrowed seeds in spring and repaid after harvest. Merchants borrowed silver to fund trade expeditions, hoping to return with goods worth more than the loan. For most of history, debt was tied to something physical, usually gold or silver. If a government issued currency, it promised that paper money could be exchanged for actual gold. This was called the gold standard, and it limited how much money could exist. But in 1971, President Nixon ended this system. Suddenly, money became what economists call fiat currency. It has value simply because the government says it does, and people trust it. There's no gold vault backing it up anymore. This change transformed debt. Wealthy people could now borrow more easily because banks weren't limited by gold reserves. And the rich quickly learned how to use this to their advantage. Instead of spending their own money, they borrowed to buy assets, real estate, stocks, businesses that made them even more money. Borrowed money isn't taxed. So when a billionaire takes out a loan, they get cash without paying taxes on it. Meanwhile, their investments keep growing. As long as the income from those investments is higher than the loan payments, they profit. It all runs on trust. The system works because people believe debts will be repaid. If that trust breaks, everything collapses. But when it holds, debt becomes one of the most powerful tools the wealthy have ever used to build and protect their fortunes. How billionaires use debt to get rich. Many of us grew up hearing that borrowing money is always a bad idea. But for billionaires, that's not necessarily true. The reason is simple. Not all debt is the same. Good debt is when you borrow money to invest in something that generates income. For example, taking out a loan to buy a rental property that brings in rent every month. Bad debt is when you borrow money to purchase things that don't increase your wealth, like using a credit card to buy the newest smartphone. It might be exciting, but it won't put more money in your pocket. In simple terms, wealthy individuals rely on good debt to grow their money. Rather than spending their own cash, they borrow and put that money into income-producing assets, such as real estate, stocks, or businesses. The idea is that these investments generate returns that exceed the cost of the loan. As long as the income they earn each month is greater than the repayments they owe, they're able to pocket the difference as profit, essentially building wealth without using their own funds. Wealthy people aren't fond of paying high taxes, and debt gives them a clever advantage. Since borrowed money isn't considered income, it isn't taxed. Even though they must pay interest on loans, that expense is often outweighed by the income their investments generate, making debt less of a burden. This strategy is a form of legal tax avoidance, which helps reduce their overall tax bill. It's important to distinguish this from tax evasion or fraud, which are illegal. So how does good debt actually work? In essence, the rich borrow money to invest in assets that produce more income than the cost of the loan. That way, they grow their wealth while keeping taxes lower. Real estate. The first strategy the wealthy use is real estate, and it is such a favorite among the rich. They use something called a mortgage, basically a large loan from the bank to buy houses or apartments. Take Grant Cardone, for example. He's a massive real estate investor who built his fortune using what he calls good debt. He borrows money to buy an apartment building. Then he rents it out. The tenants pay rent every month, and that rent money goes straight to paying back the bank loan. Over time, the property itself becomes more valuable, so he's collecting rent and watching his building increase in value, all without spending a single dollar of his own money up front. Cardone learned this by watching major corporations. He only takes on debt that makes him more money than it costs. When interest rates are low, he borrows more. When they're high, he switches to using cash. This is what he calls good debt. Debt that generates income, not debt that drains your wallet on cars and clothes. The result? Massive wealth built on borrowed money. The bank provides the cash, the tenants pay it back, and he keeps the profits plus the rising property value. That's the power of real estate and good debt working together. The second way rich people use debt is through investing. It's kind of like borrowing money cheap and making more money with it. If a rich person borrows $100,000 at a 7% interest rate, that means they have to pay $7,000 each year for the loan. But instead of just holding on to the money, they invest it somewhere that gives them a 15% return. On $100,000, that's $15,000 earned in a year. Now take away the $7,000 they owe in interest, and they're left with $8,000 profit. Even after taxes and other costs, they still make money. So the idea is simple. Borrow at a lower cost, invest at a higher return, and keep the difference as profit. The third strategy is called buy, borrow, die. It sounds dramatic, but it's actually pretty simple. Step 1. Buy. A rich person buys $100,000 worth of assets, like stocks or real estate, that usually go up in value. Step 2. Borrow. Instead of selling those assets when they need cash, which would mean paying taxes, they borrow money from the bank. For example, they might borrow $20,000 using their $100,000 in assets as a guarantee. Since loans aren't counted as income, they don't pay taxes on that money. Step 3. Die. Over time, the $100,000 grows to $150,000. When the rich person dies, their child inherits the $150,000. The $50,000 gain that happened while the parent was alive is erased for tax purposes. The child doesn't pay taxes on it. If the child later sells the assets for $160,000, they only pay taxes on the $10,000 increase since they inherited them. It's kind of like getting a free pass in Monopoly. Skip the taxes, keep the gains, and pass the wealth on. The leveraged buyout. You're walking through your neighborhood and you spot an old rundown arcade. The games still work, but the place looks tired. The owner seems overwhelmed and isn't making much money. You see something they don't. This place could be amazing. But here's the problem. You don't have enough money in your piggy bank to buy the whole arcade yourself. You go to a bank and say, look, I want to buy that arcade for $100,000. I only have $10,000, but I have a plan to make it profitable. Can you lend me the other $90,000? The bank looks at your plan and says yes. This borrowed money is called leverage, like using a lever to lift something heavy you couldn't lift alone. You buy the arcade, now you own it, but you owe the bank $90,000 plus interest. You get to work, you clean the place up, fix the broken games, add new ones, create a loyalty program, and start hosting birthday parties. Suddenly the arcade is packed every weekend. Instead of making $1,000 a month in profit, it's now making $8,000 a month. Every month, you use the arcade's profits to pay back the bank. After a few years, the loan is completely paid off. The arcade now belongs to you, free and clear. Now the arcade is successful, well known, and making great money. Someone offers you $200,000 for it. You sell it and pocket $200,000 minus your original $10,000 investment. You've turned $10,000 into $190,000 profit, all by borrowing money, improving the business, and selling it for more. That's a leveraged buyout. Rich investors do this with real companies worth millions or billions of dollars, but the basic idea is exactly the same as our arcade story. Why rich people choose debt. If someone has $1 million in the bank, why would they borrow money instead of just using their own cash? It seems backward, right? But there's actually some clever thinking behind it. Reason number one, avoiding the tax trap. When rich people sell their investments to get cash, they have to pay capital gains tax. Sometimes up to 20% or more of their profit just disappears to the government. However, when you borrow money, you don't pay taxes on it. The government doesn't consider a loan as income because you have to pay it back. So rich people can access huge amounts of money without triggering any tax bill. It's like the difference between selling your assets and losing 20% to taxes versus borrowing against them and keeping everything. 2. Using other people's money. Think about it this way. Would you rather risk $100,000 of your own money on a business idea, or risk $10,000 of your money and $90,000 of the bank's money? If the business fails, you've only lost $10,000 instead of $100,000. That's a huge difference. Meanwhile, you can use your remaining money for other investments. It's a safe way of saying don't put all your eggs in one basket. 3. Your money keeps growing. While you're using borrowed money to buy a new investment, your original money stays invested and keeps earning returns. Imagine you have $500,000 in stocks earning 10% per year. Instead of selling those stocks to buy a rental property, you borrow the money. Now you're earning money from both the stocks and the rental property. Your money is working twice as hard. Using debt isn't a magic solution. There are real risks involved. The values can drop, businesses can fail, and interest payments add up. If you borrow money to buy a house worth $1 million and the housing market crashes, that house might only be worth $700,000. You still owe the full loan amount, but your investment just lost value. Remember our arcade story? What if nobody came to the arcade after you fixed it up? You'd still owe the bank every month, but you wouldn't have the profits to pay them back. Now you're in serious trouble. And don't forget, loans aren't free. Banks charge interest, which means you're paying back more than you borrowed. If your investment doesn't earn enough to cover those interest payments, you're losing money instead of making it. That's why smart, wealthy people don't just borrow recklessly. They understand the risks, they diversify their investments, and they always have a backup plan. How rich people protect themselves. Smart, wealthy people don't just borrow recklessly. They follow some important rules. Diversification. They spread their money across many different investments. Stocks, real estate, businesses, bonds. If one fails, the others keep them afloat. Understanding the terms, they read every detail of their loans. What's the interest rate? When are payments due? What happens if they can't pay? Having a backup plan, they keep emergency money available and don't borrow so much that one bad month could ruin them. Debt is a powerful tool that can multiply wealth, but it's like a chainsaw, incredibly useful in the right hands, but dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Rich people master the tool, understand the risks, and use it strategically to build even more wealth while keeping their tax bills low. If you want me to make other videos explaining these topics, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Thanks.